The coaching inn at Ashfield Cross was not the kind of establishment that received summonses. It received postchaises with mud on the axles and travelers with hats pulled low against the rain, and it received the odd parcel for the draper's wife 2 doors down. And sometimes, on the nights when the wind came off the moor with real intention, it received the sound of a man weeping in the upstairs passage, and pretended not to. A legal summons arrived instead, on paper stiff enough to cut, sealed with a crest Clara Mosswood recognized before she had even broken the wax. It was a different kind of arrival entirely. It came on a Tuesday in November, carried by a solicitor's clerk who had the pinched look of a man accustomed to delivering things no one wished to receive. He asked for her by name. Clara Mosswood. Formerly in the employ of the Fane household, Devonshire. Clara came out of the kitchen with flour still on her wrists, and she did not flinch when the clerk read the document aloud in the low-ceilinged hall, because she had known, somewhere beneath her ribs, that this moment had a shape to it, and she had been carrying it for 3 years. The summons required her to appear before a judicial inquiry and give a full account of the circumstances surrounding the death of Lady Cecily Ashmore, Duchess of Carrow, on the 14th of March, 1821. She was to present herself at Carrow House, Northumberland, within the fortnight. She heard the clerk out. She signed the receipt of notice with the name that was still hers, in the handwriting her father had taught her by lamplight, in the schoolroom of a house they no longer owned. The clerk was already reaching for his hat when she became aware, very slowly, that she was not alone in the hall. The man at the top of the staircase had not moved during the reading. He was tall, dark-coated, quite still, and she would not have noticed him at all if she had not looked up at exactly the moment he looked down. His face gave nothing away. His eyes were the color of winter water over gray stone, and they rested on her with an attention so particular it was nearly a statement. Behind him, hovering at the edge of the doorway with the expression of a woman who had spent a lifetime calibrating exactly how much contempt to permit herself in public, was Lady Henrietta Fane. "That will do," Lady Fane said, addressing the clerk, though her gaze moved to Clara with the ease of long practice. She said it the way she said everything, not loudly, but with the confidence of a woman who had never been required to raise her voice to be obeyed. "The paid woman will understand what is required of her. She has done it before." The paid woman. Clara's hands were still. She folded the copy of the summons along its existing crease and set it in her apron pocket, where it pressed against the other folded paper she had carried for 3 years. The one no amount of money had ever persuaded her to surrender, though she had accepted money once, and the weight of that acceptance was the one thing she could not put down. If you are just joining this story now, stay close. What Clara knew, and what the Duke of Carrow believed she knew, were not the same thing. They never had been. She had come to the Fane household in the winter of 1819, a young woman of 21 with good references from a vicar's wife in Somerset, and a way of listening that people in service learned quickly was worth more than any polished manner. She had been engaged as lady's maid to Cecily Fane, who had recently married the Duke of Carrow, and who spent the first year of her marriage at her aunt's estate, for reasons Clara was not told and did not ask. Lady Fane managed Cecily the way a careful hand manages a nervous horse, with attention so complete it left no room for the horse to recognize the bit. Cecily was 24 years old and lovely in the way of women who have been told since childhood that their loveliness was their purpose. She was not stupid. She was not unkind. She was the product of a specific and rigorous education in helplessness, conducted over many years by Lady Henrietta Fane, who had raised her niece from the age of 9, and who had selected Lord William Ashmore, Duke of Carrow, as the optimum destination for a young woman whose fortune would pass to Lady Fane's management upon the occasion of an advantageous marriage. The Duke was wealthy, titled, respected, and absorbed in the running of a northern estate that kept him absent from London for the better part of 8 months of the year. Lady Fane had calculated the absence carefully. What she had not calculated was that Cecily, in the 3rd year of a marriage conducted largely through letters and occasional visits, would begin to understand the nature of the arrangement she had been educated into. And she had not calculated either that the young woman she had engaged as Cecily's lady's maid would be the kind of person who listened. Clara knew things. She knew the shape of Cecily's grief, which was different from unhappiness. For grief is the recognition of loss, and Cecily had begun to understand precisely what she had lost. She knew the sound of the letter that arrived on a Thursday in February, the one that told Lord William of an urgent matter with the Ashmore tenant accounts, written in Lady Fane's hand, though signed with the steward's name. She knew what Cecily had said when Lady Fane came to her room that evening. "I did not know you had written to him." And she knew what Lady Fane had replied, pleasant as the closing of a door. "I did only what was necessary, my dear. He will return in a month. You will be quite recovered by then." She knew what Cecily had pressed into her hand on the night of the 14th of March, a folded paper sealed with a plain wafer, with only the word William written on the outside. She knew what happened when she came to Cecily's room at dawn and found what she found. She knew that Lady Fane arrived within the quarter hour, and that the doctor arrived within the half, and that by the time any servant was permitted to speak, the story had already taken the shape Lady Fane intended. And she knew that 3 weeks after the funeral, she had been called into Lady Fane's morning room, and set before her on the writing table was a sum that represented 4 years of Clara's wages, and Lady Fane had told her that the family was consolidating its household staff, and that Clara's position had been found redundant, and that the payment was in recognition of her good service, and that she would, of course, wish to spare the family any further difficulty by leaving quietly. Clara had looked at the money. She had thought of her mother in the lodging-house in Exeter. She had taken it. She had never signed a statement. She had never uttered a lie. She had simply taken the money and walked out of the house with the folded letter still in her pocket, because Lady Fane did not know it existed, and Clara could not bring herself to surrender the one honest thing Cecily Ashmore had managed to get out of the world she had been locked inside. What she did with it, she had not been able to determine. And so she had carried it, for 3 years, in every apron she owned. This was the weight she carried through the door of Caro House on a gray Wednesday in late November. The house was larger than she had expected. It was not a house designed for impression. It was designed for use, the stone worn honest by 3 generations of Ashmores who had treated their estates as working things rather than monuments to their consequence. A housekeeper named Mrs. Quint met her at the service entrance, which Clara preferred, and showed her to a room above the still room that was plainly furnished and clean, and had a window that looked north across fields she could not yet name. She was given supper, and the time and place of the inquiry's preliminary session, and the instruction that His Grace would see her the following morning in the library before any other meeting took place. She lay awake for a long time with the folded letter on the table beside her, listening to the house breathe around her. The fire in the small grate had burned down to coals by the time she finally acknowledged that she was not going to sleep, and she rose and sat at the narrow table and unfolded the letter in the dark, not to read it, for she had read it only once, on the morning she left the Fane house, standing in the kitchen passage with her bundle already in hand, but simply to hold it. To feel its particular texture between her fingers, the paper slightly thickened where the ink had dried over 3 years. Cecily's handwriting was careful, the loops of her letters trained into a specific elegance that had nothing natural about it and everything of effort. She had written it in haste, but she had written it clearly because she had known she was writing to someone who deserved clarity. Clara folded it again and set it back on the table. The Duke of Caro arrived in the library at 8 o'clock precisely. He wore a dark coat and no expression that she could read from the doorway. He stood at the window with his back to her for a moment after she entered, as though composing something, and then he turned and looked at her in exactly the same way he had looked at her in the hall of the coaching inn, as if he were trying to establish the precise dimensions of what she was. "Miss Mosswood," he said, "you accepted the payment." "Yes, Your Grace." "And you are nevertheless here." "I received a summons." Something shifted in his face, so briefly she might have imagined it. "Lady Fane's solicitor represents the family's interest in this inquiry. He has authority to compel testimony. That authority is genuine." He paused. "He does not have authority over the content of what you say." Clara looked at him steadily. "I know. She will attempt to speak with you before the inquiry convenes. Today, if she can arrange it. Perhaps this evening." He moved from the window and came to rest at the edge of the desk, which brought him closer than he had been. Close enough that she was aware of the height of him, the breadth of the coat across his shoulders, the quality of his stillness which was not the same as the stillness of a man at rest. It was the stillness of a man who had learned to hold himself very carefully. "I am asking you not to allow that conversation. Whatever she offers you, and she will offer something, I am asking you to refuse it until the session." "She has already paid me once," Clara said. "I am aware of what that costs." He looked at her. The weight in it was not skepticism. It was closer to something that had been turned inward for a long time and could not find its way back out. "What is it you believe I know, Your Grace?" "I believe you were present in the household throughout the winter and spring of 1821. I believe you knew my wife." "I did. And I believe that Lady Fane paid you to leave rather than to stay." He set his hands flat on the desk. "I am not accusing you of anything, Miss Mosswood. I am trying to establish the shape of what I do not yet know." "She paid me to leave," Clara said. "She did not pay me to say anything specific." He looked at her. "Is there a difference?" "Yes," Clara said. "There is." He did not respond. She could not tell if she had unsettled him. He turned back to the window and said in a voice that was entirely without inflection, "You will attend the preliminary session at 2 o'clock. Do not speak with Lady Fane or with her solicitor without me present. That is not a request, Miss Mosswood." She understood that. She felt the heat of the fire at the room's far wall and the quality of the morning light coming off the northern fields, and she left the library understanding that whatever she had imagined the Duke of Caro to be, cold or calculating, guilty or innocent, she had not imagined him as someone who meant to be fair to her. She was not sure yet what to do with that. She made a wrong turn in the upper corridor that afternoon and came out at the wrong end of the servants' stair and found herself at the threshold of what turned out to be the schoolroom. She heard a small voice, and then two small voices, and then a nursemaid appeared with a child of perhaps 4 on her hip, and a girl of 7 walking solemnly beside her. The girl stopped when she saw Clara. "Are you the lady from the inquiry?" the girl asked. "Agnes," the nursemaid said. "I am," Clara said. "My name is Miss Mosswood." Agnes regarded her with the frank assessment that only children and very old people are still unashamed to display. She had her father's eyes, gray and direct, and her mother's mouth, which Clara recognized with a small shock of grief and surprise. "Papa is sad about the inquiry," she said. "He said he hoped the lady would be honest." "Agnes," the nursemaid said again, and began to move along the corridor. Clara stood in the doorway of the schoolroom for a moment after they had gone. 2 children. She had not known about the children. Cecily had been expecting in the final months. The formal record had noted it, and Clara had known at the time, and had not known how to carry that alongside everything else. Agnes had been 2 when Cecily died. Thomas had been born 4 months afterward. They had a father who sat in libraries at night beside the portrait of their mother, carrying a guilt that had been arranged for him by a woman who needed his silence more than she needed his truth. On Thursday morning, she rose early and went down to the kitchen to ask for hot water, and she passed through the back passage and heard Lady Fane's maid Prior, a thin-mouthed woman who had been with the Fane household since before Clara's time, speaking in a low voice to one of the Caro footmen. She was not attempting to be discreet. She had the air of a woman who had long since decided that what she said in servants' passages was beneath notice. The paid woman, Prior said, as though it were simply her designation, as though it were the most accurate possible label for a person, and therefore the most efficient. Clara fetched her hot water and went upstairs and stood at her window for a long time looking at the northern fields, which were still the color of November, and did not promise anything. On Friday, in the great room where the household assembled for its main meal at noon, Mr. Norbert Gale appeared for the first time. He was a stout man, with the energy of someone who had found that the threat of legal precision was more efficient than actual legal precision. He sat beside Lady Fane at the table, with the ease of a man accustomed to being exactly where power was. He spoke with the deference of someone who had long since ceased to distinguish between Lady Fane's interests and justice, and he looked at Clara across the table with the particular attention of a man cataloguing an obstacle he intended to remove before the session. "Miss Mosswood," he said, pleasantly enough, "I understand you have been in domestic service since you left the Fane household. An inn, was it? In Yorkshire?" "Ashfield Cross," Clara said. "Quite so. And you received compensation upon your departure from the Fane household?" "I did." He smiled. It was the smile of a man who believed that facts arranged in a certain order could stand in for truth. The family was generous in trying circumstances. "I should hope your account at tomorrow's preliminary session reflects a proper appreciation for that generosity." He paused, and his pleasantness became something else, something with edges. A paid woman ought to remember who paid her. The room was not entirely quiet, but it was quiet enough. Mrs. Quint, at the far end of the table, examined her bread. 2 of the upper footmen became very still in the particular way of servants who are listening to something they will not be asked to repeat. William Ashmore, at the head of his own table, set down his glass. He did not look at Gale. He looked at Clara with the same precise and particular attention he had turned on her since the coaching in, and for the first time she saw something in his face that was not composure. It was brief. It was the look of a man who had been handed a very specific kind of evidence. She did not look away from him. That evening she was carrying a stack of ledgers from the housekeeper's room to the library, where Mrs. Quint had asked her to assist with the household records for the inquiry's reference, and she passed a door that stood open an inch, and she heard the voice of the scullery maid, a girl of perhaps 15 named Nance, saying in a frightened flat tone that she did not take it. She heard Prior say that Lady Fane was quite clear she had seen her in the silver cabinet. She heard Nance say she had not been near it, that she had been in the kitchen all morning. And she heard Prior say, with the patience of someone who already knew how the question would settle, that it was Nance's word against Lady Fane's then. Clara set the ledgers down outside the library door. She went back along the corridor and knocked on the door and opened it. Prior looked at her with the expression of a woman interrupted in the middle of a useful task. Nance looked at her with the expression of a girl who had stopped expecting anyone to come through a door on her behalf. Lady Fane did not see Nance in the silver cabinet, Clara said. Lady Fane arrived at Caro House this week. She does not know where the silver cabinet is. Pryor's expression went flat. You were not party to this conversation. The door was open. I heard it clearly. Clara looked at Nance. When were you last in the kitchen? This morning, Nance said. All morning. Mrs. Quint can say. Then go and ask Mrs. Quint to say so, Clara said. Now, before any formal report is made. Nance looked at Pryor, and then at Clara, and something very careful and economical happened in her face. The calculation of which direction trust was more likely to lie, and she went. Pryor said nothing. She left the room with the deliberate unhurriedness of a woman who intended to pretend none of this had occurred. Clara stood in the small room for a moment. Her heart was not entirely steady. She was aware that she had stepped into something, and that stepping into things had costs, and that she had been trying for 3 years to stay in rooms where the costs were predictable. She picked up the ledgers from where she had set them in the corridor and carried them to the library. The Duke was already there. He was at the writing table. Not working. Simply sitting with his hands flat on the desk in the firelight. The way she had come to understand was how he looked when he was thinking about something he could not resolve by thinking. He looked up when she came in. He was very still. You heard that, she said. The door was open, he said. It was not a question. She set the ledgers on the shelf. She did not turn around immediately. She was aware of the fire, and of his presence at the table, and of the particular quality of the room when it held both of them. She turned around. Nance was not in the silver cabinet, she said. Lady Fane would not have known to claim it, except that Pryor told her which room to name. He said nothing. I thought you should know, she said. He looked at her with the gray directness that was becoming familiar, and said, in a quieter voice than she expected, that he had been watching her in this house for 4 days. I know what she is. I did not know what you were. I am beginning to. I know what she is. I did not know what you were. He paused. I am beginning to. If you have stayed with this story long enough to feel what is accumulating in that room, then you already know that what was passing between them in the firelight was not yet anything either of them was prepared to call it. Stay, it is almost time. She found him later that same evening in the portrait gallery. She was coming from the still room with a candle, taking the longer route back because the shorter route ran past the schoolroom and she could hear Agnes still awake and being settled, and she did not want to intrude on that. The light was dim in the gallery passage, and she came around the corner and found him standing before a portrait that was hung at the gallery's far end, in the part of the house where the candles were not yet lit for the evening. He did not turn when she came in. He seemed to know she was there. She would have known what portrait he was standing before without seeing its subject. She would have known from the quality of his stillness, which was different from the stillness he wore in meetings and at table. This stillness was older. It had been in him for longer than the inquiry. She is not accurately rendered, he said after a moment. His voice was level in the way of a man who has been practicing levelness for 3 years and has become very good at it in every situation except this one. The painter made her appear content. She was not content. I was absent long enough not to know it. And then I was called further away. And by the time I returned, there was nothing to come back to. Clara stood behind him and did not move. The inquiry believes I was in the house when she died, he said. That particular whisper has been very useful to Lady Fane. I was in Northumberland. I had received word of a matter with the tenant rolls that required my presence urgently. By the time I returned, it was done, and the story had been arranged, and I was told that Cecily had been suffering in ways she had not disclosed to me, and that my long absences were the cause, and that I was, in short, precisely what the season had already decided I was. He did not look away from the portrait. A cold man who left his wife to grieve alone. That version required my silence, and I gave them my silence, because I believed I owed it. "You were called away," Clara said. He turned. He looked at her in the candlelight, and she saw what she had not been able to see in the library, or at the table, or in the coaching-in hall. The wound was there, exact and specific, sitting in his face like something that had been present for 3 years, and had never once been asked to leave. "You know," he said, "I was in the house. I knew the letter that called you away was not from your steward." She paused. "I knew who wrote it." He was very still. "Lady Fane summoned you away," Clara said. "She had been managing your wife for years before the marriage and years within it, and she arranged your absence in the final month because she believed Cecily was beginning to act on her own counsel. She was afraid of what Cecily might tell you if she had access to you without Lady Fane present." She did not look away from his face. "It was not your blindness. You were not permitted to see." He said nothing for so long that the candle had burned a 1/4 inch before he moved. "Why did you not come forward?" he said. The words were plain. There was no accusation in them. Or if there was, it was the kind that begins from genuine bewilderment rather than from blame. "I accepted the money," Clara said. "I thought it made me a paid woman and nothing more." "Did it?" She reached into her apron pocket. She drew out the folded paper, still sealed with its 3-year-old wafer, still with the single word William on the outside in Cecily's careful hand. She held it out. He looked at it for a long moment before he took it. She watched his face change, which was not a dramatic thing. It was the smallest possible change, the way a room changes when you open a window and the air moves in a direction it has not moved in a long time. She left him there in the gallery, standing before his wife's portrait with the letter in his hand, and she went back to her room above the still room and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and waited for the thing she had been carrying to finish setting her down. She was aware of a feeling she had no precise name for, not relief, not righteousness, not even the particular exhaustion of a long truth finally told. It was something quieter than all of those. It was what it felt like when you stopped waiting for something terrible to happen. What Lady Fane understood by Saturday morning was that the shape of the inquiry had shifted in a way she had not authorized. She understood it from the quality of Mrs. Quint's address to her at breakfast, which was scrupulously correct in a way it had not been before, and from the way the Caro footmen had repositioned themselves in the hall without being asked, and from the Duke's face across the table, which no longer had the quality of a man managing guilt. He ate his breakfast with the steady attention of a man who had resolved something internal and was now free to observe the room clearly. Lady Fane asked to see Clara privately before the inquiry's formal session. The Duke appeared at the drawing-room door within 4 minutes of Clara entering it, without being summoned. "Gale will speak for me in this matter," Lady Fane said. She directed it to the Duke, not to Clara. It was a deliberate choice, the acknowledgement that Clara was an instrument of the conversation rather than a party to it, which was the last calculation of that kind Lady Fane would be permitted. "Gale may attend the session," the Duke said. "He may not speak with Miss Mosswood outside it." Lady Fane's composure was a precisely constructed thing. one of the most deliberate Clara had ever observed in another person. She had a quality of stillness that was the inverse of the Duke's. His was trained and effortful, the discipline of a man who knew he felt too much. Hers was structural, a feature of the architecture, rather than the occupant. She did not feel too much. She felt exactly as much as was useful. "Miss Mosswood," Lady Fane said, as though the Duke were not present, "I should like to remind you of what you accepted, and why. You were in considerable difficulty at the time of your departure. The payment I offered was a recognition of that difficulty, a courtesy. You offered it 2 days after the funeral," Clara said, "in a household managing considerable grief. In a household managing considerable exposure." Clara kept her voice level. It was easier than she had expected. "You did not offer it because I was in difficulty. You offered it because I had been in the room, and I had been listening for 1.5 years, and you could not know precisely what I had heard." Lady Fane's fan, which had been resting across her palm, did not move. "You are a servant who accepted 4 years' wages to leave a household. That is what you are. Whatever you choose to call the arrangement does not alter its nature." "Then I am a servant who accepted 4 years' wages and left with a letter I did not know what to do with," Clara said. "And I kept it for 3 years because I could not bring myself to surrender it. And I am here now because a judicial inquiry summoned me, and I intend to tell them what I know." "The paid woman's testimony," Lady Fane said. And there was something different in her voice now. Not anger, which she was too practiced to show, but the particular chill of a person who has seen the edges of their available territory. "Will be received accordingly. No inquiry will prefer the account of a servant who took money to leave over the account of a family that lost a daughter. You have nothing that could stand against us, Miss Mosswood," the Duke said from the doorway. "She has the letter." Lady Fane turned her head. It was very slow. "Cecily's letter," he said. "The one she wrote the night she died. The one you did not know existed." He looked at Lady Fane with the steady gray attention that Clara had been observing for 4 days, and she saw for the first time that it was not coldness. It was what equanimity looks like in a man who has finally been given something accurate to stand on. "You paid Miss Mosswood to leave. You did not pay her for what she carried out of the house. And it seems you did not know what she carried. The inquiry was not a long affair. It was 2 hours of formal testimony, with Gale objecting at intervals and being overruled, and the inquiry's chair reading Cecily's letter into the record in the careful voice of a man who understood the weight of a document that had waited 3 years to be read. The letter was not dramatic. It was clear. It said, in Cecily's trained handwriting, that she had been afraid, and that she had understood for some months that her aunt did not intend for her to be anything other than what the marriage had made her, and that she had tried to reach her husband through letters that she had not been permitted to send, and that she hoped he would know, if he ever read this, that what had happened was not his doing. She had written, "I did not want you called away. It was not my request." Clara sat at the inquiry table and answered every question asked of her, and did not embellish a single word. She gave dates and she gave rooms, and she gave the names of other servants who had been present and who might be called. She said what she had heard, and she said when she had heard it, and she said plainly that she had accepted money, and plainly that she had not signed any statement, and plainly that she had retained the letter in her possession because it had been given to her by the person who wrote it with the intention that it reach the person whose name was on it. Mrs. Quint, called as an additional witness, confirmed the date of Lady Fane's letter in the steward's name. An elderly woman named Mrs. Pell, who had been in the Fane household before Clara and had since removed to a small cottage near Darlington, confirmed that the pattern of Lady Fane's management of Cecily stretched back to her girlhood, and that Lady Fane had written correspondence on her niece's behalf on more than one prior occasion when she believed it necessary to manage outcomes. Lady Fane sat at the far end of the table with the posture of a woman in the process of a very specific and private recalculation. She was not shaking. She was not weeping. She was too intelligent for either. She was revising her available positions, one by one, and finding them fewer than she had arrived with. Gale said, in the measured tone of a man who had decided that tone was his last instrument, "The paid woman's testimony cannot be separated from the established fact of her payment. Whatever she claims to have known, she accepted money to leave the household. The inquiry must consider what weight to assign to an account given by a person who received such payment." The Duke rose from his chair. He was not a man who raised his voice. He did not raise it now. He waited until the room had recognized that he was standing. And then, he said, in the particular level tone that he used when he was being precise about something important, "She told the truth. The rest of you did not." 11 words, not 12. The room received them without sound. Lady Fane's hand was flat on the table. The inquiry's chair wrote something in his ledger. Mr. Gale sat back. He had the look of a man who had wagered on a reliable mechanism and was watching it fail to operate. Clara looked at the table. The fire was behind the Duke, and she could not fully see his face, but she had heard the weight in the sentence, and she had heard the particular placement of the word she, and she understood that it was not the word that had been used to describe her for 4 days in that house. The inquiry chair noted that the record would be reviewed and that a formal finding would follow within 30 days. He thanked the parties for their attendance. He closed his ledger. Clara rose and moved toward the door. "Miss Mosswood." She stopped. She turned. He was crossing the room. Not quickly. Deliberately, in the way of a man who had made a decision far enough in advance that he was no longer uncertain of where he was going. He stopped when he reached her, at a correct distance, with the room's full attention still upon them both, and she thought that he understood perfectly well that what he said now would be heard, and that he had chosen to say it here, rather than in a corridor. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I assumed the worst of what you knew, and why you had kept it. I asked you to carry this house's weight in the 4 days since you arrived without telling you that I was already beginning to understand what you were." He paused. His voice was low, but not private. It was the voice of a man making a record. "Stay, not as a witness, as whatever you choose to call it, as I will find a better title for it if you require one." She thought of the letter now read into the inquiry's record, finally doing the work Cecily had pressed it into her hand to do. She thought of Agnes in the corridor with her gray eyes and her careful walk. She thought of 3 years in the coaching inn with the cold coming under the door and the letter in every apron pocket she had owned, and the particular quality of carrying something that had no home yet. "I would stay," she said, "if the paid woman is not how you intend to call me." Something happened in his face. It was not quite a smile. It was what a smile looks like in a man who has not permitted himself one in long enough that his face has partially forgotten the expression. "She is not," he said. That was November. By February, the inquiry had returned its formal finding. The death of Lady Cecily Ashmore had been the result of circumstances long antecedent to the date of her passing, and no fault attached to the Duke of Cairo, who had been absent from the house on the 14th of March without knowledge of his wife's condition. The finding named Lady Henrietta Fane's correspondence in the steward's name and noted the pattern of management detailed in Mrs. Pell's testimony. Lady Fane removed herself from London in January and was not seen in the season of 1825. Mr. Gale took on other clients. The house at Carow settled into its winter, and then began, in the way of northern houses, its slow return toward light. Agnes asked Clara to hear her read, and Clara did, every morning in the schoolroom when the light came in clear and cold from the north, Agnes's finger moving along the line of text with the concentration of a child who has decided that reading is a skill worth acquiring, regardless of whether anyone has told her to acquire it. Thomas, who was 4 years old and had a habit of appearing without announcement at the most inconvenient moments, placed his small hand in Clara's during one of these sessions and kept it there for the duration, which Clara understood was his way of conducting an experiment in trust. And she let him. She was still learning what it was to be in a house that did not require her to carry something in her pocket. The folded letter was returned to the Duke by the inquiry's clerk in April, along with a full copy of the proceedings record. He set it on the writing table in the library. He did not put it in a drawer. Clara saw it there on a Tuesday morning when she brought the household accounts, and then again on Thursday when she came to return a borrowed atlas, and she understood that he was keeping it where he could see it, which was not the same as being unable to look away, and was very different from wanting to. She came to the library one evening in early spring, when the light had begun to stay past 7 o'clock for the first time since autumn, which felt like a recovery. She had meant to return a book of botanical illustrations that Agnes had borrowed and forgotten on the wrong shelf. He was at the desk with accounts, and he did not look up when she came in, which she had learned meant he was not alarmed by her presence, which was itself a thing she was still learning to measure. She set the book on the shelf. She was going to leave. She did not. She stood for a moment in the warm room with the accounts and the fire and the folded letter flat on the desk, and she thought about all the things she had been called, and the one thing she had not, and the one honest thing she had carried, and how carrying it had not destroyed her after all. He set down his pen. He looked at the letter on the desk. He did not look at her. She would have told you, Clara said. She was getting there. She had started to understand that you were not Lady Fane's man. She was running out of time, and she knew it, and she was trying to reach you. He was quiet. She pressed that letter into my hands because she wanted you to have it, Clara said. Not as evidence. She wanted you to know she had not blamed you. He reached out and set his hand on the letter. He did not pick it up. He simply rested his palm over it, the way you cover something you are not giving back. His hand was long-fingered and unhurried and entirely still. Clara looked at that hand. She thought that the truth had a particular texture when it was finally allowed to settle. Not like triumph, not like vindication. Like a window opened in a room that had been shut a long time. He looked up at her. Clara, he said. The first time he had used her given name, and he said it the way he said most things, without ornamentation, as a simple, accurate thing, as if it were the word that fit. She did not answer. She did not need to. He could see her face in the firelight, and what her face said was plain, and she had stopped trying to keep it from him some weeks ago, in the small way that one thing becomes permitted at a time. Outside, the Northumberland spring was doing its slow and stubborn work. The fields were not yet green, but they were promising to be. The light hung late in the sky with the patience of things that have waited a full season to return, and at 7:30, Thomas appeared in the doorway, as he always did, and placed his small hand in Clara's without ceremony. The way he had learned was simply what hands were for. She stayed. Thank you for staying until the end. If Clara's choice to speak moved you, leave the moment you found most costly in the comments. Every account is different. That is the point. The letter was on the desk. The fire was warm. The spring came in.